So, hi, I'm Averso, and I figured it would be a good idea to make a little bit of a tutorial for the very first steps you need to make or take when you wanna mod Crash Bandicoot trilogy. I'm gonna be using Crash 2, but most of the stuff that I'm gonna be showing is or applies to Crash 1 and Crash 2 as well. So the main program or the main tools you are gonna be using is CrashEdit, and you can go to CrashEdit's GitHub and you go to crashbandicoothacks.com, which has download links for the current versions, everything. So you probably get the entire toolkit from here. It also contains a debug emulator and another Crash Bandicoot hacking tool called Dr. NSF, which can do some stuff CrashEdit cannot do, but CrashEdit can do some things that Dr. NSF cannot. And it also contains some program for for sound editing, which I don't really use, but it's there. So I'm gonna put this here, and I'm gonna make myself a new folder for the game files. Now, the game files are what you are gonna be editing using CrashEdit. They are inside the game image, which means you need to get them out of the image somehow and then make a game image again. I use Pavriso, but there's a tool called CDMage included in the toolkit, so I'm gonna use that this time. I need to make my way to where my files are. C games Crash 2 PAL version. Now it's M2/2352. I'm not really sure why, but yeah, it's it. Now you want to extract these files. Just make your way to where your files are gonna be. Tutorial, game files, and you just extract. Meanwhile, I can open CrashEdit. Extraction has been completed, so I can close this. This is the main branch of CrashEdit. There is also a dark mode CrashEdit with some little tweaks that airumu has made, which you can find on her GitHub, which I'm gonna link later. I mostly use that, but this time I'm gonna use this. So the game files are 4 folders, S0 to S3, which contain the game levels, and then there's SCSC or SCUC underscore something, which is the game's executable, and then there's systems and CNF, which just calls the executable. Now you don't really need to care about these two at all. Now you can see that the files in the folders are in pairs. There's level A, which has NSF and NSD file. NSF file contains the actual data, such as animations, models, zones, scenery data, textures, and such. And A file, which you can see is much smaller, NSD file, which you can see is much smaller, contains metadata, which is information such as chunk or page count, entry count, entity count, and some more stuff which you probably don't really need to hear if you're a beginner. And it also contains spawns. So let's say I wanna go to Turtlewoods. Now, let's say you don't know what level ID Turtlewoods is. There are various lists that contain level IDs. In this list you can see for Crash 2, Turtlewoods is level 1E. So that is what you need to open. It's Crash 2. And this is what you see. You on the left side see a list of chunks, which are pages, which are individual parts of levels, which are dynamically loaded and deloaded by the game. And these chunks contain actual game data. Now you can see the texture chunks, which contain textures. They contain data, but they are also in a chunk. Then you have sound chunks, which contain sounds. And there are instrument or wavebank chunks, which contain instruments. But the main thing are normal chunks. And these chunks contain things such as animations, then sort list, which you don't really need to interact with, scenery, which is the world geometry, and the main thing, which is zones. A zone is a partition of a level that holds several important things. One of them is camera path. The game has a fixed camera path which moves along. Now there are some ways to make the camera switch to a different path. For example, when there's a transition or when there's a split. But most of the time the camera just goes along this path. It also contains collision, which you don't really need to and don't really have a way to edit yet, but you can view it. And it contains entities. Entity is something like a spawner, and depending on, let me look for a box. Depending on the type and subtype, it spawns something. It also has arguments which can control various things, such as for crates it is things like next ghost in the ghost chain, or reward. For example, if this was 97, it would be alive, but if it's 0, it's just a couple of fruits. And when you open an entity in the viewer, you have the option to, for example, move it, and you can also duplicate entity, which is the easiest way to create a new entity. So let me just go to zone like 05U. And then you can see various things. Fruit, then there's some cosmetic stuff like leaves. I don't really see them in the viewer, but... And then there's fruit. So the easiest way to add an entity is to duplicate entity. There's also an option to add an entity, but that doesn't include it in draw lists, which are structures where the game stores information about which entities to draw. For example, in this path, this yellow series of dots is the camera. The camera is made up of these three entities, and in the first entity, which contains most of the information, you can see draw lists, which contain delta based or delta formatted lists of entities that are about to be drawn or are to be undrawn. I have a tutorial for this, so I'm not gonna go in depth, but they are here. So let's say you want to add an entity. I'm gonna just duplicate this bottom fruitcake, and this is the new one. You can also rename it. I'm gonna probably use a steel crate here. Now I know that steel crate is 23, but as you change type and subtype, it shows various crate types. If you didn't know what type it is, you can just search steel. It calls something else. I've been using my own name for so long that I don't remember anymore. Oh, this level doesn't have steel crates. But let's say we wanna level with steel crates. What has steel crates? The pit has steel crates, which is level 1F. As you can see, you can have multiple files open, so I'm gonna look for a steel entity or steel crate, and I can find its subtype and type, and if it needs some arguments, those arguments too, and I can just use those 23, and let's say I just want to move it, and I want to move this. If I want really specific coordinates, I can use those as well, but you can also just do with these arrows and move it half a crate. So since I've duplicated this one, it should show about at the same time. These both should show about the same time, so I want to save. And now since I have not made any structural changes, such as moving entries between chunks or adding any things, I can just save. Now let's see whether I can just play straight away. So this is a really fast way to oh. So what you're seeing is this one. It is PSXe HDBG, and with this play button you can make a temporary game image which just spawns you directly in the level you're using. Now if you want to change your keybinds, which you probably wanna, you need to make config.lua, I think. Now I need to make sure, I don't remember the format anymore, so I'm gonna just check in the one I actually use. So you can key map specific keys or specific actions to buttons. So for example, I want V to be pause or start and A to be left. So I'm just gonna copy it to the Lua file I use. And it seems to be working. Now, you can see it crashed, and the reason it crashed is V, which is the animation the game uses for the steel crate, is not present or linked in this level. So unless you patch some stuff, you can't use it. The patching is not really difficult, but I'm not going to be showing it in this one. So I'm going to be replacing the steel crate in this zone with something this level actually uses. Now the level has TNT crates. I'm not really sure whether it uses them, but it has them, so I'm gonna be using TNT. And if I don't know what TNT uses, I can just look for an entity in a different level that uses it. We can see that the type is 34 and subtype is 0, so that's what I'm gonna be using. I'm gonna be going here. You can see it changes immediately. Now arguments, TNT has 5 arguments. This tree is the countdown, and this is just the lower portion of the value that's used as an argument. The game uses fixed point, fixed point decimal numbers. So, for example, hex 300 is 3.0, which is 3. It really just depends on the object and how it uses the value. But I'm gonna be, as you can see, this new version shows what the number is depending on how it is used. So as a number, it's number 3. As distance or units, game coordinate units, it's this much. So I've got the TNT here. It should be drawn, and oops, all the animations and models for this crate are in the level, so I should be able to just save it and play it with ePSXe. Now you noticed it lagged, but it didn't. Okay, you cannot turn this off. Now you notice it lagged, but it didn't crash, and that is because the game. You actually cannot turn that sound off. Nice. It lagged because the game contains lists containing things to load, which are similar to draw lists. They have the same structure and they contain information about what to load. So if I don't want the game to lag when it's about to draw the TNT, I should add it to load lists in every zone that is gonna be drawing this TNT, and also save time before and after that, because the loading is not instantaneous. PlayStation CDs have pretty slow load time for getting data from CD to RAM, so you need to be loading things a little bit in advance. I'm not going to be messing with those because that's a bit tedious. Now this should be showing what chunks are loaded and unloaded, but something's wrong with it. I'm not really sure what. Alright, that's working. So in case you wanna fix box count and fix nitro detonators, there are specific options for these. What else is interesting? With button T, you can disable textures. With X, you show collisions. With V, you switch between wireframe and full collision in collision view. With F, in this view, you disable neighbor zones collision, and with C, you show collision types, which is a bit advanced, but it's useful. And now let's say you don't want just to use this image with PSXe. You want to make an actual game file that you can use in different emulators or maybe burn and use it on a console. Now CrashEdit contains options for these. There are also other ways, but you're probably using CrashEdit is the most convenient one. So you can make a bin using CrashEdit. You need to select the folder which contains game files. I'm gonna be putting this here, and it slowly makes the game image and applies region information to it. You can use various emulators. You can use, okay. You can use ePSXe, which is very popular and it's pretty convenient. There's also Bizhawk and Mednafen, which are very accurate. Xebra is also very accurate. DuckStation is a pretty recent one. I'm not really sure how accurate that is, but my emulator of choice is Xebra. I have it pinned. Now the game image I made doesn't have the boot level changed, so it's gonna boot into the title screen as it normally does. So I'm gonna have to make my way to Turtle Woods. Oh, now I know why it was showing incorrect chunks. In CrashEdit you're supposed to pick whether you're using PAL or NTSC version because it affects, for example, the speed at which animations in the viewer are shown, and when you play using PSXe, it uses that region information for making the ROM. So now when I used correct region, it showed the chunks correctly. Now I should have built this ROM using PAL, but seems like Xebra doesn't care. Something else would care. I slowly make my way here. Now for some reason it didn't lag. So the game uses a specific, and now it lagged because it had to load a different animation. So the game uses a certain paging algorithm for loading and unloading chunks, and for some reason it didn't. It had the chunk that contains the main TNT animation loaded, but most of the time you're not gonna be as lucky, and you're gonna have to create fixed load lists. So I think that's about it. I showed how to open and close the file. I showed how to edit it. Now, there's a lot of stuff that isn't really documented and hasn't really been figured out, so you're gonna have to improvise a lot, and you're gonna be looking at different levels a lot, so you figure how specific objects are set up, because there isn't documentation for that yet. And that's about it. There are some other tutorials, for example for draw lists, which show how to fix draw lists. If you're not lucky enough to duplicate an entity and it shows properly and when it should. There's also a tutorial for importing an object into a level, which is really useful, which is done a lot. And they are gonna be in the same playlist as this one is. That's about it. See ya.